In the glittering world of royalty, where golden crowns and historic palaces are meant to symbolize stability and timeless love, there once existed a story that the whole world thought was the definition of a fairy tale, yet hidden behind that glamorous curtain lay a secret betrayal that would break hearts, destroy trust, and ultimately change the very way people looked at the monarchy itself. The year was 1981, and as Lady Diana Spencer walked down the long aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in her breathtaking gown, watched by nearly 1 billion people across the globe, the world believed they were witnessing a love story for the ages, a shy kindergarten teacher transformed into a princess, chosen by destiny to stand beside the future King of England. Crowds cheered, bells rang, and the media declared it the wedding of the century. But beneath the grandeur and the carefully staged images was a truth so devastating that even Diana herself only began to piece it together in the months that followed. For while she was marrying a prince, Charles' heart was never truly hers to claim. From the very beginning, there was another woman, a woman whose shadow would haunt Diana's marriage and life in ways she could never have foreseen: Camilla Parker Bowles. Long before Diana entered the royal picture, Charles had already built a deep and emotional bond with Camilla, a connection that not even the grandeur of a royal marriage could sever. And as Diana smiled for cameras and waved to the public, she had no idea that the very man who slipped a ring onto her finger was secretly keeping alive a relationship that should have ended with his vows. The betrayal was not loud, not obvious at first, but instead it was quiet, subtle, woven into small moments that grew into undeniable pain. Diana began to notice late-night phone calls, gifts meant for someone else, words spoken with a tenderness that she realized were never reserved for her. Slowly, the perfect fairy tale began to unravel before her eyes. What made this secret so cruel was not just that Charles was emotionally entangled with another woman, but that Diana herself was so young, so innocent, so desperate to be loved, and instead of being protected, she was thrown into a world where her role was more duty than devotion, more performance than partnership. The palace, with all its rules and silence, seemed to turn a blind eye, leaving Diana isolated and confused, forced to play the smiling princess while her heart was breaking in private. The betrayal was not just about love, it was about trust, about the deception of an entire system that valued appearances over truth. Every wave to the crowds, every elegant dress, every photograph that painted a picture of happiness was, in reality, a mask that covered her growing despair. And yet, Diana, with her vulnerability and grace, carried on, believing perhaps she could change her husband's heart, perhaps she could fight for the love she deserved. But deep down, she began to realize that she was trapped in a story that was never meant to be hers, that her marriage had been built on a foundation already cracked by secrets and lies. This was not just a private heartbreak, it was the beginning of a scandal that would one day shake the monarchy to its core. And though the world adored Diana, no one yet understood the depth of pain she was carrying behind those bright blue eyes and soft smiles. What the cameras didn't capture, what the crowds never saw, was that even as Diana walked into her new royal life, she was already stepping into a betrayal so profound it would leave scars on her soul forever. And the question that lingers even now is simple. How could such a secret have been hidden for so long in a world where nothing escapes the public eye? As the early years of Diana's marriage unfolded, the cracks in the royal fairy tale widened, and what once looked like a dream to the world slowly turned into a haunting reality for the young princess who found herself battling loneliness inside the grandest palaces on earth. At first, Diana tried to dismiss her suspicions, convincing herself that perhaps she was overthinking, that perhaps Charles' distant nature was just the pressure of duty weighing heavily on him. But it didn't take long for subtle hints to grow into painful confirmations. A bracelet here, engraved with initials that weren't hers. A phone call interrupted in the middle of the night. Charles' tone softer and more tender than she had ever heard when speaking to her. Even their honeymoon, which should have been a time of joy and closeness, became clouded with shadows when Diana discovered photographs of Camilla tucked away in Charles' diary, silent reminders that she was never truly alone in her marriage. The betrayal was no longer something she could ignore, and the palace walls, which should have offered her comfort and protection, began to feel like a prison, keeping her trapped in a role where her voice carried no weight and her pain no audience. To the public, Diana was the radiant princess who charmed everyone she met, who smiled warmly at children and waved gracefully to adoring crowds. But behind closed doors she was crumbling, struggling with feelings of inadequacy, rejection and despair. She confided in close friends that she felt like a third person in her own marriage, a phrase that would later echo around the world as one of the most haunting truths ever spoken by her. Charles, meanwhile, seemed torn between duty and desire, but his actions often revealed where his heart truly lay. Instead of nurturing the fragile bond with his wife, he allowed his connection to Camilla to thrive in secrecy, sometimes with the help of those within his circle who turned a blind eye or even helped to conceal the affair. For Diana, the weight of this betrayal was unbearable, and it drove her deeper into emotional struggles that the monarchy either ignored or chose not to understand. Her cries for help were often dismissed as weakness, her pain masked by the expectation that she simply had to get on with it, like every royal before her. But Diana was not built for silence. She was human, vulnerable, and desperately in need of love that she would never receive from the man she married. Slowly, whispers began to surface, with journalists and insiders noticing the coldness between Charles and Diana, the forced smiles, the lack of intimacy, the subtle signs that something was deeply wrong. But still, the palace continued its strategy of silence, presenting to the world a perfect image while protecting the secrets that lay beneath. Diana, however, could no longer contain the storm within her. She began to express her pain through her actions, through her candid words in private conversations, and eventually through shocking public revelations that would make headlines around the globe. But before the world heard her truth, Diana lived through years of torment, feeling abandoned not just by her husband, but by the very institution she had been sworn into. This betrayal wasn't just Charles's secret, it became a betrayal by the monarchy itself, which sacrificed Diana's happiness for the sake of tradition and appearances. And as her struggle deepened, Diana began to realize that if no one would fight for her, she would have to fight for herself. But at what cost? What would it mean for a young princess, adored by millions, to break the silence and expose the truth? The turning point in this tragic story came when Diana realized she could no longer live in silence, no longer bear the crushing weight of a secret that was slowly consuming her spirit. For years, she had endured the cold distance of her husband, the subtle reminders that his heart belonged elsewhere, and the suffocating expectation to smile through the pain as though nothing was wrong. But Diana was not a woman built to fade quietly into the background. She was strong, empathetic, and fiercely human, and it was precisely those qualities that made her the people's princess. By the early 1990s, the strain of the marriage had become impossible to hide. The world began to see glimpses of the truth, cracks in the carefully painted image of royal perfection. Diana's once radiant eyes now often appeared heavy with sadness. Her body language revealed the tension she could not disguise, and rumors about Charles and Camilla's ongoing affair began to swirl more loudly in the press. While the palace tried to control the narrative, Diana decided to take control of her own voice, leading to one of the most shocking and unforgettable moments in modern royal history. In her famous 1995 BBC Panorama interview with journalist Martin Bashir, Diana bared her soul in front of millions, speaking words that would echo for generations. "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." That single sentence shattered the illusion of the perfect royal couple and confirmed what many had only speculated about: that Charles had betrayed her trust and her love, and the monarchy had allowed it to happen. The betrayal was no longer a secret, it was exposed to the entire world, leaving Charles humiliated, the palace scrambling, and Diana both admired and pitied in equal measure. Yet behind that brave interview was a woman who was deeply wounded, a woman who had suffered years of emotional isolation, who had developed eating disorders as a way of coping with the unbearable pressure, and who had even confessed to moments of despair, where life itself felt too heavy to endure. Her honesty shocked the royal family, who had always lived by the motto, "Never complain, never explain," but it resonated deeply with ordinary people, who saw in Diana not just a princess but a human being struggling with the same emotions of heartbreak and betrayal that many could relate to. The world rallied to her side, and in that moment, the monarchy's carefully constructed image began to crumble. The betrayal that Charles thought he could conceal had now become one of the most infamous scandals in British royal history. and though the monarchy survived, it would never again be seen with the same unquestioned reverence. But while Diana's truth had been spoken, her pain was far from over. Her courage in breaking the silence only deepened the divide between her and Charles, making reconciliation impossible and divorce inevitable. Yet even as she prepared to walk away from the royal family, Diana knew that the betrayal she had suffered was not just a chapter in her life. It was a wound that had scarred her forever, one that would continue to follow her until her tragic and untimely death. And so the question lingered: was Diana's openness a victory for truth, or had it placed her in even greater danger within a world that valued silence above all? After Diana's shocking revelations, the royal family could no longer keep up the image of a perfect marriage, and the pressure to formally address the broken relationship between Charles and Diana grew stronger with every passing day. By 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced to Parliament that the couple had separated, a statement that sent shockwaves across Britain and the world. For the first time in modern history, a royal marriage that had been celebrated as the pinnacle of tradition and unity was crumbling in front of millions, and the betrayal at the heart of it was impossible to ignore. Yet even in separation, the tension did not ease. Charles and Diana lived parallel lives under the constant glare of the media, every move scrutinized, every interaction analyzed. The tabloids feasted on the scandal, publishing leaked phone calls between Charles and Camilla that left the monarchy humiliated, while Diana, with her honesty and emotional openness, became more beloved than ever. In 1996, after years of turmoil, the divorce was finalized, and Diana was stripped of her royal title, Her Royal Highness, a move that deeply wounded her but also set her free from the rigid institution that had suffocated her for so long. For many, this was not just a divorce. It was the tragic end of a fairy tale that had turned into a nightmare, the final confirmation that betrayal had shattered what should have been a story of love and loyalty. Yet in the aftermath, Diana began to find her own voice more powerfully than ever before. Free from the constraints of royal duty, she dedicated herself even more fiercely to humanitarian work, becoming a global icon of compassion and courage. From walking through landmine fields in Angola to comforting AIDS patients at a time when stigma and fear were widespread, Diana showed the world what true leadership and empathy looked like. But even in her newfound independence, the shadow of betrayal never fully left her. The constant presence of Camilla in Charles' life, now increasingly visible, was a reminder of the love Diana had never been able to hold on to. And while she tried to rebuild her life, rumors, pressures, and relentless paparazzi continued to chase her at every turn. The irony of Diana's existence was heartbreaking. The very institution that had failed to protect her continued to thrive, while she, the most adored member of the royal family, found herself fighting for privacy, dignity, and peace. Charles, meanwhile, began to appear more openly with Camilla, a move that further fueled public outrage and sympathy for Diana. The betrayal that had once been whispered in secret was now undeniable, and the people, who had placed their faith in the monarchy, began to question whether loyalty to tradition was worth the cost of human happiness. Diana herself admitted in interviews that she never felt supported, never truly accepted into the royal family, and though she carried herself with grace, her eyes often told a different story, a story of heartbreak, loss, and resilience. As her divorce settled and she tried to shape a new path for herself, it seemed as though the betrayal she had endured would always define her in some way, as though the world could never separate Diana the princess from Diana the victim of a cruel love triangle. And yet, even in that pain, she managed to transform her suffering into strength, becoming a voice for the voiceless and a symbol of hope for millions who saw in her a reflection of their own struggles. But fate, cruel as it was, had not finished with Diana, and the next chapter of her life would take a turn so tragic, so sudden, that the world would never recover. The question remained heavy in the air. Had Diana finally escaped the shadows of betrayal, or was she walking straight into the arms of another heartbreak far more dangerous than the one she had left behind? The final chapter of Diana's story was one of unimaginable tragedy, a heartbreaking end that left the world in shock and forever tied her legacy to the betrayal she had endured. By 1997, Diana had begun to carve out a life for herself away from the rigid grip of the royal family, and for the first time in years, she seemed to be rediscovering fragments of happiness. She had become one of the most photographed women in the world, not just for her beauty and style, but for her courage and compassion. Her humanitarian work gained global attention. Her warmth touched hearts everywhere she went, and her independence symbolized strength to millions. Yet behind this new beginning lingered the same relentless forces that had haunted her for years. The paparazzi that followed her every step, the media obsessed with her every move, and the constant whispers about her relationships. On that fateful night of August 31st, 1997, Diana's life came to a devastating end in a car crash in Paris, alongside Dodi Fayed, the man she was rumored to be romantically involved with. The news spread like wildfire, freezing time itself, as millions woke up to the shocking headline that the people's princess was gone. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace, mountains of flowers lined the gates, and the grief was unlike anything Britain had ever seen. But beneath the sorrow was also anger. Anger at the press for chasing her to her death, anger at the institution that had failed to protect her, and anger at Charles for the years of betrayal that had driven Diana into such loneliness and despair. Her death did not just mark the loss of a beloved figure, it forced the monarchy into its greatest crisis of modern times. The royal family, criticized for their cold response in the days following her passing, seemed more distant and detached than ever, while the people demanded compassion, transparency, and acknowledgement of Diana's pain. In those days of mourning, the world was reminded that Diana had not died in peace. She had died still fighting against the forces that betrayed her. Even after her passing, the shadow of Charles and Camilla loomed over her story, with many wondering whether Diana's life would have been different if she had been given the love and loyalty she so desperately craved. For years after, Charles faced public scorn, and Camilla was vilified as the woman who had stolen the princess's happiness. Their eventual marriage in 2005, a reminder to many of the wound that had never healed. And though time has softened some of those judgments, the memory of Diana's suffering remains sharp, etched forever in the minds of those who watched her journey from fairy tale bride to heartbroken wife to tragic icon. The betrayal that once lived in whispers had become one of the defining scandals in royal history, changing the way the world saw the monarchy, and leaving behind a legacy of questions that may never be answered. Was Diana's fate sealed from the moment she said, "I do"? Could the royal family have done more to protect her, to value her, to love her? Or was she always destined to be sacrificed at the altar of tradition and secrecy? These questions linger, heavy and unresolved, every time her story is told. What is certain is that Diana's spirit did not fade with her death. She lives on in the hearts of the people who adored her, in the humanitarian causes she championed, and in the sons she raised, who continue her legacy of compassion and connection. But her story remains at its core, one of betrayal. Betrayal by a husband who could not give her the love she deserved, and by an institution that chose silence over protection. And that betrayal, finally revealed in all its painful truth, ensures that Diana will never be remembered simply as a princess. She will be remembered as the woman who dared to show her humanity in a world that demanded perfection, and who paid the ultimate price for it.